The funeral home's air conditioning hummed quietly, but I could barely hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat in the front row of Magnolia Memorial Chapel, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the mahogany casket that held my husband of 48 years, Robert Williams, my Robert. Or at least I had thought he was mine. The scent of lilies was overwhelming, almost sickening. I'd always hated lilies, but Robert's sister had insisted. "They're traditional," she'd said, as if tradition mattered more than the fact that I'd be smelling them for the rest of my life every time I thought about this day. I was vaguely aware of people around me. Our neighbors from Rutledge Avenue, Robert's colleagues from the insurance company where he'd worked for 30 years, my book club ladies. The pastor was saying something about eternal rest and God's mercy, but his words were just noise, a distant mumble that barely registered. Then I heard the door at the back of the chapel open. Heels clicked on the hardwood floor, sharp, deliberate clicks that seemed to echo off the walls. The clicking didn't stop at the back pews like a latecomer's would. They kept coming, growing louder, closer. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on that casket, on the spray of white roses I'd chosen, on the framed photo of Robert smiling that gap-toothed smile he'd had since the day I met him in 1974. The clicking stopped, right beside me. "Excuse me." The voice was female, younger than mine, with a slight nasal quality that grated immediately. "That's my seat." I finally turned my head. A woman stood in the aisle, maybe mid-50s, with auburn hair that was definitely dyed and too much makeup for a funeral. She wore a black dress that was far too tight, too short, and entirely too much cleavage for a woman her age at a solemn occasion. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her eyes, cold, calculating blue eyes, stared down at me with something that looked like contempt. "I'm sorry?" I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "That seat," she repeated, gesturing to where I sat. "I should be sitting there. I was more important to Robert than you were." The chapel went silent. Even the pastor stopped mid-sentence. I could feel every eye in the room turn toward us. My face burned with humiliation, but something else too, something harder, anger maybe, or just exhaustion with being shocked. Before you find out what happened next, I need to share something important. You're watching this channel because you value real stories, authentic experiences from women who've lived through challenges and came out stronger. These stories are completely free, but your support means everything to us. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. It takes just 1 second to click that like button, and that simple action helps this channel reach more women who need to hear these stories. Take a moment to comment below and let us know what you think so far, and tell us what city or country you're watching from. Your engagement helps us grow this community and share more empowering stories. Now let me tell you how I got to that moment in the funeral home and what happened after. My name is Dorothy Williams, though most people have called me Dot since I was a little girl growing up in the low country of South Carolina. I'm 70 years old now, and until 3 weeks ago, I'd been married for 48 years. That's nearly half a century of shared mornings and quiet evenings, of building a life together brick by brick, compromise by compromise. I met Robert Williams in the summer of 1974 at a church picnic down by the Ashley River. I was 20 years old, fresh out of secretarial school, working my first real job at a law office on Broad Street. Robert was 22, just back from 2 years in the Army, trying to figure out what to do with his life. He had this way of tilting his head when he listened to you. Like every word you said was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. We courted for 2 years, the old-fashioned way. He'd pick me up in his used Chevy truck, and we'd go to the movies or out for barbecue at Melvin's. He met my parents, my 3 sisters, my grandmother, who insisted on reading his palm and declared he had a good, honest line. We married in September 1976 at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, the same church where his parents had married and where we'd eventually bury both of them. Charleston in those days was different from the tourist destination it became later. It was a working city, a port city, with regular folks living regular lives. Robert got a job at Palmetto State Insurance, starting as a claims adjuster. I kept working at the law office until I got pregnant with our first child in 1978. We had 2 children. Sarah came first, in January 1979, with Robert's dark hair and my green eyes. Then Thomas arrived 3 years later, in 1982, the spitting image of his father. We bought a little house in West Ashley, nothing fancy. Just a 3-bedroom ranch with a carport and a small yard where Robert would spend Saturday mornings pushing the lawnmower in straight, careful lines. Those early years were hard in the way that all young marriages are hard. We had more month than money most times. Robert worked long hours, sometimes handling claims late into the evening. I stayed home with the babies, which was what you did back then if you could manage it. We ate a lot of spaghetti and hot dogs. We drove cars until they literally wouldn't run anymore. We made Christmas presents instead of buying them some years. But we were happy. Or at least, I thought we were. Robert was steady. That's the word I'd have used if someone asked me to describe my husband. Steady as a rock. He went to work every morning at 7:30, came home at 5:45. He mowed the lawn on Saturdays, went to church with us on Sundays. He didn't drink much, never gambled, didn't run around. He was home for dinner almost every night. As the kids grew older, life got easier financially. Robert was promoted to senior adjuster, then to supervisor. I went back to work part-time when Thomas started middle school, taking a job at the public library on Calhoun Street. I loved being around books, loved the quiet of the stacks, loved helping people find what they were looking for. We settled into the comfortable rhythm that long-married couples find. We had our routines. Wednesday nights were for dinner at his mother's house until she passed in 1999. Friday nights we'd usually get takeout and watch whatever was on TV. Once a month, we'd go out to dinner at one of the nicer restaurants downtown, usually for our anniversary or birthdays. Robert's hair went gray, then white. My waistline expanded despite my best efforts. We got reading glasses, then bifocals. We watched our children graduate high school, go off to college. Sarah became a teacher, married a nice boy named Michael, moved to Columbia. Thomas went into finance, stayed closer to home, married a girl named Jennifer we'd known since she was in middle school. We became grandparents, 4 grandchildren eventually. Sarah had 2 boys. Thomas had a boy and a girl. Robert was a doting grandfather, always sneaking them candy I'd told him not to give them, always ready to get down on the floor and play trucks or dolls despite his creaky knees. We talked about retirement. Robert had his 30 years in at Palmetto State, and the company had a decent pension plan. We'd paid off the house. We had some savings, nothing extravagant, but enough. We started making plans. Maybe we'd travel a bit, see some of the country we'd never had time or money to explore. Maybe we'd volunteer more at church. Maybe we'd just enjoy having time to ourselves after all those years of working and raising children. Our neighborhood had changed over the years. Young families moved in, fixed up the older houses, planted new trees. We knew most of our neighbors by name. They'd wave when they drove by, stop to chat when we were out in the yard. We attended neighborhood cookouts, pitched in for the annual street Christmas decorations, kept an eye on each other's places when folks went on vacation. My mama had died in 2010, Daddy 2 years before that. Robert's father had passed back in 1995, his mother in 99, like I mentioned. We'd buried both sets of parents, attended too many funerals of friends and family. That's what happens when you get to be our age. Death stops being something far off and becomes a regular visitor. But I never imagined I'd be burying Robert. Not at 72. Yes, he'd put on weight over the years, and the doctor had mentioned his cholesterol was a bit high, but he was active, relatively healthy, still working part-time as a consultant, even though he'd officially retired from Palmetto State at 65. Then came that Tuesday morning in early April 2024. I remember the date exactly, April 9th. I woke up around 6:30, like always. The room was still dim, morning light just starting to filter through the curtains. I reached over to Robert's side of the bed, ready to poke him awake like I did every morning. His skin was cool, too cool. I knew immediately, even before I said his name, even before I shook his shoulder, even before I put my hand against his chest and felt no rise and fall of breath. Robert was gone. He died in his sleep, sometime in the dark hours between midnight and dawn. The doctor who came with the paramedics said it was likely his heart, probably quick, probably painless. Probably. That word haunted me. Probably painless. Did that mean he might have felt something? Might have been scared? Might have wanted to wake me? Tell me goodbye? The next weeks were a blur of arrangements and visitors. Sarah and Thomas came immediately, of course. They handled most of the details I was too numb to deal with. The funeral home, the cemetery plot, the obituary, the flowers. People brought food, so much food that my refrigerator and freezer couldn't hold it all. The kitchen counters were covered with casserole dishes and Tupperware containers. Everyone kept saying the same things. He was a good man. He lived a full life. At least he didn't suffer. You have so many wonderful memories. I nodded and thanked them and accepted their hugs, all while feeling like I was watching everything happen to someone else. We set the funeral for Saturday, April 20th. That gave us enough time for Thomas to arrange to fly in from a business trip, for Sarah to coordinate with her school for a substitute teacher, for distant relatives to make travel arrangements if they wanted to attend. Robert's best friend from the insurance company, a man named Bill Hutchins, who'd retired the same year Robert did, called to ask if he could say a few words at the service. Of course, I said yes. Robert would have wanted that. They'd worked together for over 25 years. Played golf together every other Sunday for a decade. The night before the funeral, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak. Everything felt wrong. The bed was too big. The house was too quiet. My future, which I'd imagined so clearly just weeks ago, was now a blank space I couldn't begin to picture. I thought about our first date, about our wedding, about the day Sarah was born and Robert paced the hospital waiting room for 8 hours, because they didn't let fathers in the delivery room back then. I thought about the time Thomas broke his arm falling out of a tree and Robert carried him 6 blocks to the car because we only had one vehicle and I'd taken it to the grocery store. I thought about 1,000 ordinary moments that seemed precious now that they could never happen again. Around 3 a.m, I got up and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I sat at the kitchen table, the same formica-top table we'd bought used in 1978, and I cried. Not the polite, quiet tears I'd been crying in front of visitors. Big, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. I cried until I had no tears left, until my head pounded and my eyes were swollen nearly shut. And then I got dressed, put on makeup to hide the evidence of my breakdown, and prepared to bury my husband. The funeral was set for 10 o'clock Saturday morning at Magnolia Memorial Chapel. It wasn't the fanciest funeral home in Charleston, but it was respectable, clean, with a chapel that could hold about 100 people. The director, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Edwards, who'd handled both my parents' funerals, had been kind and patient with all our requests. We'd chosen hymns Robert had liked, How Great Thou Art, and Amazing Grace. Pastor Miller from our church would officiate. Bill Hutchins would speak, and if any other friends wanted to share memories, they could. We'd planned a small graveside service afterward, then a reception back at the church where the ladies' auxiliary had volunteered to provide lunch. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion. Black, simple, with long sleeves despite the April warmth. Sarah had helped me pick it out at Belk's. She'd also helped me write the obituary that ran in the Post and Courier. Robert James Williams, 72, of Charleston, passed away peacefully on April 9, 2024. He was preceded in death by his parents, James and Ellen Williams. He is survived by his loving wife of 48 years, Dorothy, his children Sarah, Michael, Henderson, and Thomas, Jennifer Williams, 4 grandchildren, and his sister Margaret David Thompson. Robert worked for 30 years at Palmetto State Insurance and was an active member of Grace Community Church. A funeral service will be held Saturday, April 20th at 10 a.m. at Magnolia Memorial Chapel. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the American Heart Association. Loving wife of 48 years. That's what it said. That's what I was. That's what I thought I was. Right up until that moment in the funeral chapel, when a woman I'd never seen before in my life told me I should give up my seat because she'd been more important to Robert than I was. The morning of the funeral arrived gray and humid, typical Charleston weather for mid-April. There was a threat of rain in the air, that heavy feeling that comes before a storm. I'd woken at 5, given up on sleep by 5:30, and spent 2 hours getting ready for a ceremony I dreaded with every fiber of my being. Sarah and Michael picked me up at 8:30. Thomas and Jennifer met us at the funeral home. They'd offered to ride with me, but I'd told them to go ahead, that I wanted a few minutes alone before the service. That was a lie. I just didn't want to cry in front of them again. I'd already cried so much in the past 11 days that I felt wrung out, empty. When we arrived at Magnolia Memorial, there were already cars in the parking lot. Early arrivals, the way there always are at funerals. People who want to pay respects but don't want to seem like they're trying to be part of the family. They'd sit in the back rows, sign the guest book, view the body quickly, then find their seats. Mr. Edwards met us at the side entrance, the one reserved for family. He led us to a small room where we could wait until it was time. There was coffee and water, tissues, a few chairs. The room smelled like air freshener and grief. "The casket is ready whenever you'd like to have a private viewing," Mr. Edwards said quietly. "Just the immediate family, before we open the doors." I nodded. We followed him into the chapel. It was empty except for the casket at the front, surrounded by flowers. So many flowers. The lilies, of course, but also roses, carnations, gladiolas. Every surface seemed to be covered with arrangements and wreaths and sprays. We approached the casket as a family. It was open, as I'd requested, though part of me wished I'd chosen a closed casket. Robert lay there in his best suit, the navy one he'd bought for Sarah's wedding, looking peaceful and somehow not quite like himself. The funeral home had done their best, but death changes a face in ways makeup can't quite fix. Thomas stood on my right, Jennifer on his other side. Sarah was on my left, with Michael beside her. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt both longer and shorter. Nobody spoke. There wasn't anything to say. Then Mr. Edwards quietly informed us that people were arriving, and we should take our seats. The service would begin promptly at 10. We filed into the front pew, the place reserved for immediate family. I sat in the center, Thomas on my right, Sarah on my left. Behind us, the chapel filled with Robert's colleagues, our neighbors, church members, distant relatives I recognized but couldn't quite name. Pastor Miller began the service with a prayer. Then we sang, "How Great Thou Art," the congregation's voices rising in that particular way people sing at funerals, with emotion and uncertainty mixed together. Bill Hutchins walked to the podium to share his memories of Robert. He talked about golf games and fishing trips, about Robert's terrible jokes and his reliability, about what a steady friend he'd been. Steady. There was that word again. I was staring at the casket, at the photograph of Robert, barely listening, when I heard the door open. The clicking heels, the silence that fell over the congregation. The voice beside me demanding that seat, and that's when my carefully controlled composure finally shattered. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice stronger now, clearer. I stood up, facing this woman who'd had the audacity to interrupt my husband's funeral. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was triumphant, cruel. "I'm Jessica Morgan, Robert's girlfriend. Well, more than girlfriend. We were together for 15 years. He loved me, not you. This whole charade?" She gestured at the funeral, at the flowers, at the grieving congregation. "It's all a lie. Everyone here should know that Robert Williams lived a double life, and I was the one who made him happy. The chapel erupted in whispers. I heard gasps, shocked exclamations. Sarah grabbed my hand, squeezing it so hard it hurt. Thomas stood up, his face red with anger, ready to confront this woman. But I held up my other hand, stopping him. Because in that moment, as shocking as Jessica Morgan's words were, something clicked in my mind. 15 years. That's what she'd said. 15 years of an affair I'd supposedly been too stupid or too blind to notice. And suddenly, all those little things I'd explained away, all those small inconsistencies I'd rationalized, all came rushing back with perfect, horrible clarity. The late nights Robert explained as inventory work, the weekend conferences that seemed to happen more frequently, the new cologne that appeared in his bathroom cabinet about 8 years ago, something expensive that wasn't his usual drugstore brand, the credit card bills I wasn't supposed to see, the ones he said were for business expenses, the way he'd started keeping his phone face down on the table, the mysterious gym membership he'd gotten despite never showing any interest in exercise before. How had I missed it? Or worse, how had I known but refused to let myself know? Jessica was still talking, her voice rising. He told me he was going to leave you. He said after he retired fully, after his pension was secured, he'd file for divorce. He promised me that. And now he's gone, and I deserve something. I gave him 15 years. I gave him my youth, my prime years. I should be in that front row, not you. I should inherit something from him. He loved me more than he ever loved you. The room was spinning. I gripped the back of the pew to steady myself. Pastor Miller was trying to restore order, asking Jessica to please step outside, but she ignored him. She'd come here with a purpose, and she wasn't leaving until she'd said what she came to say. "The will," she continued, pulling a tissue from her purse and dabbing at her eyes in a gesture that seemed rehearsed. "I know Robert had a will. He told me I was in it. He promised me I'd be taken care of. So I'm here to make sure that happens. I'm here to claim what's rightfully mine." That's when Robert's attorney, Harold Bennett, stood up from his seat 3 rows back. Harold had been our lawyer for over 20 years. He'd drawn up our wills, handled the closing on our house, managed the paperwork when Robert's mother died. He was 62, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from decades of dealing with people at their worst. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. If you believe you have a claim to Mr. Williams' estate, you're welcome to contact my office on Monday to discuss the matter appropriately. But right now you need to leave and let this family mourn in peace." Jessica spun to face him. "I'm not leaving until I get what I deserve. Robert loved me. He would have married me if he'd lived. I'm entitled to—" "You're entitled to nothing," Harold said, his voice still calm, but with an edge now. "And if you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police and have you removed for disturbing the peace. This is a private service and you're not welcome here." For a moment, I thought she might actually attack him. Her face flushed red, her hands clenched into fists. But then she seemed to collect herself, smoothing her dress and adjusting her purse strap. "Fine," she hissed. "I'll leave. But this isn't over. I'll be at that lawyer's office first thing Monday morning, and we'll see who gets the last laugh. Robert loved me. He told me so every single day for 15 years. She turned and walked back down the aisle, her heels clicking with each step, the sound echoing off the walls. Everyone watched her go. The door slammed behind her with a sound like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. Pastor Miller cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a brief moment to collect ourselves," he said gently, "and then we'll continue celebrating Robert's life." I sat back down, but I wasn't really there anymore. My body was in that pew, but my mind had gone somewhere else entirely. 15 years. An affair. A mistress who showed up at his funeral claiming he'd loved her more, claiming she deserved part of his estate, claiming he'd promised to leave me. Sarah was crying beside me, quiet tears running down her face. Thomas looked like he wanted to hit something. Jennifer and Michael just looked shocked, uncomfortable, out of their depth. The rest of the service passed in a blur. More hymns, more prayers, more people saying nice things about Robert that now seemed like lies. How could he be a devoted husband if he'd had a mistress for 15 years? How could he be a man of integrity if he'd been living a double life? We went through the motions. The final viewing, the procession to the cemetery, the graveside service where Pastor Miller intoned more prayers and committed Robert's body to the earth. Everyone kept shooting me looks, combinations of pity and curiosity and discomfort. The whispers never stopped. At the reception afterward, in the church fellowship hall, people approached me with careful words. "I'm so sorry. What a terrible thing to have happen. You don't deserve this." Robert would be horrified. Would he? Would Robert really be horrified? Or had he known exactly what he was doing, carrying on an affair for 15 years, making promises to another woman, living a lie while I cooked his dinners and washed his clothes and slept beside him every night? I left early, claiming exhaustion. It wasn't a lie. I was exhausted. Exhausted in my bones, in my soul, in every part of me. Sarah and Michael drove me home, tried to convince me to let them stay, but I insisted I needed to be alone. And I did need to be alone, because I needed to think. I needed to process. I needed to figure out what was real and what wasn't in my 48-year marriage to a man who apparently hadn't been the person I thought he was. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in our bed, my bed now, and I went back through our entire marriage in my mind, every year, every memory, every moment, and I started seeing things differently, things I'd overlooked or explained away or simply missed because I trusted him. The affair had apparently started about 15 years ago. That would have been 2009. Robert was 57, I was 55. What had been happening in our lives then? Sarah had gotten married in 2008. We'd helped pay for the wedding, nothing fancy, but still a stretch on our budget. Thomas was dating Jennifer seriously by then, though they wouldn't marry until 2011. We were dealing with my mother's declining health. She'd been diagnosed with dementia, and we were trying to figure out care options. It had been a stressful time. Money was tight. Our attention was divided. Robert had started working those longer hours, staying late at the office more often. He'd told me he was taking on extra cases to help cover the wedding expenses and my mother's care costs. I'd been grateful, touched by his dedication, his sacrifice. That's when it started. Had Jessica Morgan been some kind of midlife crisis? A younger woman, she looked mid-50s now, so she'd have been around 40 then, who made him feel young again, desired again? I got up around 3 in the morning and went to Robert's study. He'd had a small room off the living room that was his space, with his desk and computer and filing cabinets. I'd rarely gone in there. It was his domain, and I'd respected that. Now I didn't respect anything. I turned on the light and stood there, looking at his things. His reading glasses on the desk, his favorite pen. A mug that said, "World's Best Dad," that Thomas had given him 10 years ago. Everything looked normal, ordinary, innocent. I sat down at his desk and turned on his computer. I didn't know his password, but I tried a few obvious ones. His birthday, our anniversary, the kids' birthdays. Nothing worked. Then I tried Sarah's name combined with Thomas's, Sarah Thomas, 1979. The computer unlocked. My hands shook as I opened his email program. There were hundreds of emails, maybe thousands, going back years. Work emails mostly, advertisements, church newsletters, messages from family. I searched for Jessica and held my breath. Nothing came up. I tried Morgan. Still nothing. She was smart then. Or they'd been smart together. They'd probably used burner phones or separate email accounts or met in person. Of course they had. You don't carry on an affair for 15 years by being careless. I checked his browser history. He'd cleared it regularly, it seemed. Nothing older than a few days, all innocuous searches. Weather? News? Sports scores? The financial records, though, those told a story. I found statements going back years, credit card bills Robert had always said were for business expenses or emergencies. I'd never questioned them. Why would I? I trusted him. We had joint accounts for household expenses, but he'd kept some separate accounts for his consulting work after retirement, said it was easier for taxes. Now I went through those statements carefully. Regular charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, hotels, a jewelry store on King Street where he'd apparently spent over $3,000 in the past 2 years alone. I'd never received any jewelry from that store. My anniversary gift last year had been a stand mixer from Target because our old one had finally died. I thought about that moment in the funeral home, standing up to that woman Jessica, about how to respond when she shouted about love and deserving and inheritance. Did you feel your heart race with anger at the audacity, at the disrespect? If you're finding this story powerful, please take 1 second right now to hit that like button. Your support helps this channel reach more women who need these stories of resilience and triumph. And I want to hear from you. Comment below what you think of this situation so far. There were charges to Victoria's Secret. Multiple charges. Robert had never bought me lingerie in 48 years of marriage. He wouldn't have known where to start. I'd always bought my own sensible cotton underwear at JCPenney. Car rentals, not from business trips. I checked the dates, and they were weekends when he'd supposedly been playing golf with Bill or doing yard work. Weekend getaways with her while I'd been at home believing he was just a few miles away. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and I'd had access to it all along. I could have looked at these statements any time, but I hadn't because I'd trusted him. Because checking up on your husband's finances felt like an accusation, and I didn't want to be that kind of wife. What kind of wife had I been, though? Blind, naive, willfully ignorant? I printed out the most damning statements, the hotel charges, the jewelry purchases, the restaurant bills. I didn't know why. Maybe I just needed physical proof that I wasn't crazy, that this was real. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the windows. I was still sitting at Robert's desk, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, when I heard a knock at the front door. It was only 7 o'clock, too early for visitors. I considered ignoring it, but the knocking persisted. I walked to the door, still in my bathrobe, and peeped through the little window. Harold Bennett stood on my front porch, holding a briefcase and looking like he hadn't slept either. I opened the door. "Harold, what are you doing here so early?" "I'm sorry to intrude, Dorothy," he said, "but after yesterday's incident, I think you need to know some things. May I come in?" I stepped aside and let him enter. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd had my breakdown 2 nights ago. I offered him coffee, but he declined. "Dorothy," he began, his voice gentle but serious. "Robert came to see me about 3 months ago, in early January. He wanted to update his will." My stomach dropped. 3 months ago, 3 months before he died. Had he been planning to leave me? Had Jessica been telling the truth about that? Harold must have seen my expression, because he quickly added, "Not the way you're thinking. He didn't want to leave you. Quite the opposite, actually." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Robert confessed something to me that day. He told me about Jessica Morgan, about the affair that had been going on for years. But Dorothy, it wasn't what that woman claimed yesterday. Not even close. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse. "What do you mean?" Robert told me that the affair had started 15 years ago, yes. But it had ended 10 years ago. He'd broken it off, told her it was a mistake, that he loved you and wanted to make his marriage work. He was racked with guilt about it, said he'd been a fool, said he should have confessed to you, but couldn't bring himself to destroy what you had together. I tried to process this. The affair had ended 10 years ago, but Jessica had said. Jessica didn't accept the breakup well, Harold continued. She started blackmailing him, threatening to tell you, to tell your children, to make a public scene. Robert said he was ashamed, scared, and so he started paying her to keep quiet. $5,000 a month for the past 10 years. $5,000 a month. For 10 years, that was. I did the math quickly in my head. $600,000, more than $500,000, paid to keep a secret. He came to me in January, Harold said, because he'd decided he was done. He was done hiding, done paying, done letting her control his life. He wanted to confess everything to you, regardless of the consequences. He said he'd rather lose you than keep living a lie. But he wanted to update his will first, to make absolutely sure that Jessica got nothing if something happened to him. Harold pulled out a document and placed it on the table. This is Robert's last will and testament, signed and witnessed on January 18, 2024. It explicitly states that all his assets go to you and your children. But more than that, it includes a letter. Robert wrote you a letter explaining everything. He'd planned to give it to you himself, to read it to you, to beg for your forgiveness. He told me that if anything happened to him before he had the chance to tell you himself, I was to make sure you got this letter. He pulled out an envelope. My name was written on it in Robert's handwriting, slightly shaky but unmistakably his. "There's more," Harold said. "Robert also asked me to gather evidence of the blackmail. He saved everything. Texts. Emails from accounts Jessica didn't know he'd saved. Even recordings of some of their conversations. He was planning to file charges against her. He wanted to stop her from ever doing this to anyone else." I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it, afraid of what it might say. "The reason I'm here so early," Harold continued, "is because Jessica Morgan called my office yesterday afternoon, after the funeral. Left a message saying she'd be there first thing Monday to claim what she was owed. I wanted you to see this letter before I had to deal with her. And I wanted you to know that when she shows up at my office, I'll have the police there waiting. Robert documented everything. She won't get a penny, and if there's any justice in this world, she'll face charges for blackmail and extortion." He stood up. "I'll let you read that in private. But Dorothy, I want you to know something. Robert loved you. He made a terrible mistake 15 years ago, one that cost him dearly in money and peace of mind. But he never stopped loving you. He told me that explicitly, said you were the best thing that ever happened to him, and he'd spent 10 years trying to find the courage to confess so he could finally be honest with you again." Harold let himself out, leaving me alone with the envelope. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it. My name in Robert's handwriting. Dorothy. Not Dot, which is what he usually called me, but my full name. Formal. Serious. Finally, my hand still shaking, I opened it. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten on lined paper, dated January 10th, 2024. Robert's handwriting, which had always been a bit messy, was even shakier than usual. I imagined him sitting at his desk, trying to find the words to confess 15 years of lies to the woman he'd been married to for 48 years. "My dearest Dorothy," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I never got the chance to say these things to you in person. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for so many things. But most of all, I'm sorry that I was a coward who couldn't face you when I had the chance. I'm going to tell you everything now. And I beg you to read this whole letter before you decide what to think of me, of our marriage, of our life together. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you'll at least understand what happened. 15 years ago, in the spring of 2009, I did something unforgivable. I started an affair with a woman named Jessica Morgan. She was a real estate agent I met through work. Her company handled some of our commercial policies. She was younger than you, prettier than I had any right to expect attention from, and she made me feel like I was 30 instead of 57. You remember that time? Sarah had just gotten married, and we were struggling to pay for the wedding. Your mother was getting sicker, and we were trying to figure out how to afford better care for her. I was working longer hours to bring in extra money, and I was exhausted and scared about the future and feeling old and used up. That's not an excuse. There is no excuse for what I did. But that's the context. The affair lasted about 5 years. We'd meet for lunch, for dinner, occasionally for weekends when I told you I was at a conference or doing extra work. I spent money we didn't have on her. Jewelry, dinners, hotels. I lied to you constantly. I looked you in the eye every day and lied. And the whole time, I hated myself for it. I loved you, Dorothy. I never stopped loving you. Jessica was a fantasy, an escape from real life. You were real life, the good parts and the hard parts and everything in between. You were the woman I'd built a life with, raised children with, grown old with. You knew me in ways Jessica never could, never wanted to. In 2014, I ended it. I told Jessica it was over, that it had been a mistake, that I wanted to focus on my marriage. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could just move on, try to be a better husband, maybe eventually work up the courage to confess and beg your forgiveness. But Jessica didn't accept the breakup. She started calling me, texting me, showing up at my office. She said if I didn't continue seeing her, she'd tell you everything. She'd tell the kids. She'd go to my employer and claim I'd been embezzling money. I wasn't, but she said she'd make it look like I was. She'd ruin me. I panicked. I know I should have come to you then, should have confessed everything and faced the consequences. But I was a coward. I loved you so much. And the thought of losing you, of seeing disappointment and betrayal in your eyes, of destroying what we had, I couldn't face it. So I started paying her $5,000 a month. I told you I was doing more consulting work, and I had to cover those payments on top of our regular expenses. I opened a separate credit card account she didn't know about and kept meticulous records of everything, just in case I ever found the courage to go to the police. For 10 years, Dorothy. For 10 years I've been paying Blackmail to keep her quiet. That's where our savings went. The money we should have had for retirement, for emergencies, for enjoying our later years. I stole that from us, from you. 3 months ago, I decided enough was enough. I'm 72 years old. I don't know how much time I have left, but however much it is, I want to spend it being honest with you. I don't want to die with this secret between us. I don't want our marriage, our whole life together, to be built on a foundation of lies. I've been working with Harold Bennett to gather evidence of the blackmail. I have texts, emails, recordings of conversations. I have proof of every payment I've made to her over the past 10 years. I plan to file charges against her, and I plan to confess everything to you. I know you might not forgive me. I know you might leave me. I know our children might never speak to me again. I'm prepared for that. What I'm not prepared for is continuing to lie to you for one more day. If you're reading this, it means I died before I got to tell you in person. I'm so sorry, Dorothy. I'm sorry for the affair. I'm sorry for the lies. I'm sorry for letting Jessica blackmail me instead of coming clean. I'm sorry for every single choice I made that hurt you. But I need you to know this. I loved you. From the day I met you at that church picnic in 1974 until my last breath, I loved you. You were my best friend, my partner, my home. Every good thing in my life came from you or through you. Our children, our grandchildren, our home, our life together, all of it was built by you, sustained by you. Jessica was a mistake I made when I was weak and stupid. She became a nightmare that haunted me for a decade. But you were always the truth. You were always what mattered. I've left instructions with Harold. Everything goes to you. Jessica gets nothing. I've also left him all the evidence of her blackmail, and I've asked him to press charges if I'm not here to do it myself. She doesn't deserve to profit from my weakness and her own cruelty. I don't ask for your forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. But I hope you can understand that I tried to protect you from this hurt, even though I was the one who caused it in the first place. I hope you can remember the good times we had, the real love we shared, the life we built together. Those things were real, Dorothy. Our marriage was real, even with all my failings. I hope you find peace. I hope you find happiness. And I hope someday you can think of me without too much anger or pain. I love you. I'm sorry I was never brave enough to say these things to your face. Your husband, Robert. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat there at the kitchen table as the sun came up fully, as the neighborhood woke up around me, as car doors slammed and children played and dogs barked and life went on the way it always does. Robert had cheated on me. He'd lied to me for 15 years. He'd stolen more than $500,000 from our future to pay blackmail to his mistress. But he'd also loved me. He'd ended the affair. He'd planned to confess. He'd gathered evidence to make sure Jessica couldn't profit from his weakness. He'd died trying to find the courage to tell me the truth. Did that make it better? Did that forgive 15 years of lies? Did knowing he'd felt guilty and planned to confess erase the damage he'd done? I didn't know. I honestly didn't know how to feel about any of it. What I did know was that Jessica Morgan had stood up in front of everyone we knew and claimed Robert had loved her more than me, had claimed he'd promised to leave me for her, had demanded money from his estate as if she was entitled to it. And none of that was true. She'd been blackmailing him. She'd been draining our savings, our security, our future, out of revenge because he'd broken up with her a decade ago. That I could respond to. That I knew how to feel about. Pure white-hot anger. I picked up the phone and called Harold Bennett's personal cell phone. He answered on the second ring. Dorothy? Harold, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. What time is Jessica Morgan supposed to arrive at your office on Monday? She said first thing. I assume that means 9 o'clock when we open. I want to be there, I said. I want to be there when she arrives. I want to see her face when you tell her she's getting nothing. And I want to be there when the police arrest her. There was a pause. Then Harold said, Are you sure? It might be unpleasant. I'm sure, I said. She interrupted my husband's funeral to claim he loved her more than me. She humiliated me in front of everyone I know. She blackmailed Robert for 10 years and stole money that was supposed to be for our future. Yes, I'm sure. I want to be there. All right, Harold said. I'll call the police and explain the situation. Come to my office at 8:30 on Monday. We'll be ready. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen. Robert's mug still sat by the coffee maker, the one he'd used every morning for years. His reading glasses were on the counter. His jacket hung by the back door. He was gone. My husband of 48 years was gone, and I'd never get to yell at him for what he'd done. I'd never get to demand answers, to ask him how he could have been so weak, so stupid, so cruel. I'd never get to decide whether I could forgive him or whether our marriage was strong enough to survive this betrayal. But I could make sure Jessica Morgan faced consequences for her actions. I could make sure she didn't profit from blackmail and extortion. I could make sure everyone who'd been at that funeral knew the truth. I spent the rest of the weekend preparing. I read Robert's letter over and over until I practically had it memorized. I went through all the evidence Harold had mentioned, the credit card statements, the bank records, everything that showed where our money had gone. I called Sarah and Thomas and told them everything. They needed to know. They deserved to know. Sarah cried. Thomas wanted to break something. Both of them wanted to protect me. To tell me I didn't need to go to Harold's office on Monday, that I should let the lawyer handle it. But I insisted. This was something I needed to do. Monday morning came. I dressed carefully in one of my nicer outfits, a navy pantsuit I'd bought for Sarah's parent-teacher conferences years ago. I put on makeup. I did my hair. If I was going to face Jessica Morgan, I was going to look put together and dignified. I arrived at Harold's office at 8:30 on the dot. He was waiting for me in the reception area, along with 2 police officers in plain clothes. Dorothy, Harold said, these are Detectives Martinez and Johnson. I've briefed them on the situation and provided them with all of Robert's evidence. They've reviewed it and agree there's sufficient cause to arrest Miss Morgan for blackmail and extortion. Detective Martinez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, shook my hand. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Williams. And I'm sorry you're having to deal with this on top of everything else. We'll make this as quick and painless as possible. We waited in Harold's private office. The detective stood near the door. Harold sat behind his desk with all his paperwork in front of him. I sat in one of the client chairs, my hands folded in my lap, my back straight. At 9 o'clock exactly, we heard the front door open. The receptionist's murmured greeting, high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I'm here to see Mr. Bennett, Jessica's voice rang out. I have an appointment regarding the estate of Robert Williams. One moment, please, the receptionist said. I heard her buzzing Harold's phone, the signal we'd arranged. Harold stood. Shall we? We walked out into the conference room. Jessica was already there, standing by the table, that same too-tight black dress on, that same triumphant smile on her face. The smile faltered when she saw me, but she recovered quickly. Oh, she said, you brought the widow. How touching. Is she here to negotiate how much she's willing to give me to avoid a lawsuit? Harold's expression didn't change. Miss Morgan, please have a seat. She sat, crossing her legs, looking far too comfortable for someone who was about to have her world implode. Harold opened his folder. Miss Morgan, I've asked you here today to inform you officially that you have no claim whatsoever to Robert Williams' estate. You are mentioned nowhere in his will. In fact, you are explicitly excluded. Jessica's smile disappeared. That's impossible. Robert promised me. Robert promised you nothing, Harold said firmly. What Robert did do was document 15 years of blackmail and extortion. He kept every text message, every email, every recording of your threats. He tracked every payment he made to you, $5,000 a month for 10 years, totaling $600,000. The color drained from Jessica's face. Harold continued, voice hard as steel. Robert ended your affair in 2014, Miss Morgan. You refused to accept that and began threatening to expose the affair unless he paid you. That's blackmail. For 10 years, you extorted money from a man who was trying to save his marriage and protect his family from scandal. That's a crime. Jessica stammered, her composure completely shattered. That's when the detective stepped forward. Jessica Morgan, Detective Martinez said, you're under arrest for blackmail and extortion. You have the right to remain silent. I watched as they read her rights, as they handcuffed her, as that smug, triumphant expression turned to shock and then fear. She looked at me, her eyes wide, pleading. He did love me, she said desperately. At first, he did. That was real. The emotional resolution unfolding here is powerful when someone tries to steal your dignity and you stand up for truth. If you've been moved by Dorothy's strength in this moment, show your support by clicking that like button and commenting what you think. Should Dorothy have confronted her directly? What would you have done? And don't forget to tell us what city or country you're watching from. Your engagement means the world to our growing community. I stood up and walked over to her, looked her right in the eyes. Maybe it was, I said quietly. Maybe for a few months, or even a few years, there was something between you and Robert. But whatever it was, it ended a decade ago. And instead of moving on with your life, you spent 10 years stealing from him, from me, from our future together. You didn't love him. You loved what he could give you. Mrs. Williams, Detective Johnson said gently, we need to take her downtown now. I stepped back and watched them lead Jessica out of the office. She was crying now, mascara running down her face, that confident swagger completely gone. The door closed behind them, and she was gone. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. My hands were shaking, I realized. My heart was racing. But I felt something I hadn't felt since Robert died. I felt strong. Harold walked over and put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Are you all right? I thought about the question. Was I all right? My husband of 48 years was dead. He'd cheated on me, lied to me, stolen from our future to pay off his mistress. He'd never get the chance to confess and ask forgiveness. I'd never get the chance to decide whether our marriage could survive this betrayal. But I'd also just watched justice be served. I'd stood up for myself, for my marriage, for the truth. I'd made sure a woman who'd profited from blackmail and extortion would face consequences. I will be, I told Harold. I think I will be. The news of Jessica's arrest spread quickly through Charleston's tight-knit community. It started with the police report that appeared in the Post and Courier's crime blotter section, just a brief mention of a 55-year-old woman arrested for blackmail and extortion. But in a city like Charleston, where everyone seems to know everyone else, it didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Harold's office released a carefully worded statement explaining that the late Robert Williams had been the victim of a long-term extortion scheme and that his estate would be cooperating fully with law enforcement. The statement made no mention of the affair, of course. That was private family business. But it confirmed that Jessica Morgan had been arrested and charged with serious crimes. The phone calls started that very afternoon. Friends from church, neighbors, even some of Robert's former colleagues. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, to express their sympathy, to make sure I was all right. Some were genuinely concerned. Others, I suspect, were just curious for gossip. I gave them all the same polite, brief explanation. Robert had been the victim of blackmail. The police had evidence. Justice was being served. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Sarah came over that Monday evening, bringing dinner she'd made, a chicken casserole that was one of my favorites. We sat at the kitchen table and talked for hours. She wanted to know how I was feeling, really feeling, not just the brave face I'd put on for everyone else. I'm angry, I admitted. At your father, at Jessica, at myself, for not seeing it sooner. I'm angry that he died before I could confront him, that I'll never get answers to so many questions. I'm angry that our last years together were built on lies. But, Sarah prompted, because she knew me well enough to know there was a but. But I'm also grateful, I said slowly, working out the words as I spoke them. Grateful that he ended the affair when he did. Grateful that he at least tried to protect us from her, even if he went about it the wrong way. Grateful that he planned to tell me the truth, even if he ran out of time. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, you don't have to forgive him. You don't have to make peace with what he did. It's okay to be angry. I know, I said, and I am angry, but I'm also trying to understand. Your father wasn't a bad man. He was a weak man who made terrible choices and then compounded those choices with more bad decisions. But he was also the man who held my hand through 2 difficult pregnancies, who sat up with you all night when you had croup, who worked overtime for years to make sure we could afford a decent house in a good school district. People are complicated, Sarah. Your father was complicated. Thomas came by later that week, alone this time. Jennifer was home with the kids. He was angrier than Sarah, more black and white in his thinking. I don't care what his letter said, Thomas told me. I don't care that he planned to confess. He was a liar and a cheat, and I don't know if I can forgive that. You don't have to, I said. You're allowed to feel however you feel about it. He was your father, and he let you down. That's valid. Didn't he let you down too? Thomas asked. Why aren't you more angry? Who says I'm not angry? I replied. I'm furious. I'm hurt. I'm betrayed. But I'm also 70 years old, and I've learned that anger, while valid, doesn't help me move forward. I need to grieve, yes. I need to process, absolutely. But I also need to figure out how to live the rest of my life, however long that is. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm proud of you, Mom, for how you handled that woman at the funeral, for going to the lawyer's office, for being strong. I'm not sure I had much choice, I said, Falling apart was an option, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged about Jessica's scheme. The police investigation revealed that she'd done this before, targeted other men, usually married, usually with something to lose. She'd start affairs, then demand money to keep quiet when the men tried to end things. Robert wasn't her first victim. He wasn't even her second or third. Detective Martinez called to tell me they'd found evidence of at least 4 other men Jessica had blackmailed over the past 20 years. The district attorney was building a case that would likely result in serious prison time if convicted. "Your husband's documentation was key," Detective Martinez told me. "He kept better records than any of the other victims. His evidence is going to be crucial in putting her away." I felt a strange sense of pride at that. Robert had been weak, had been a coward in many ways. But in the end, he'd done something right. He'd gathered evidence, prepared to face consequences, tried to make sure Jessica couldn't hurt anyone else. The funeral home called to tell me that the video of the service, which they routinely recorded for families, had been accidentally leaked online. I knew it wasn't accidental. Someone had wanted people to see Jessica's outburst, wanted to spread the scandal. Within days, it had been viewed thousands of times. People I hadn't spoken to in years were calling to express sympathy or horror or just to say they'd seen it. I asked the funeral home to take it down, but by then it had been shared too many times. It was out there forever, a permanent record of the worst moment of my life, becoming public entertainment. The house felt different without Robert. Not just empty, I'd expected that. But different in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd find myself starting to tell him something before remembering he wasn't there. I'd set the table for 2 out of habit, then have to put the extra plate away. I'd wake up reaching for him, my hand touching the cold, empty space where he should have been. But I was also discovering things about myself. I'd been married since I was 22. I'd gone from my parents' house to Robert's house with barely a breath in between. I'd never lived alone, never made all my own decisions, never had to figure out things like changing the oil in the car or filing taxes by myself. Now I had to learn all of that. And it was hard and frustrating. And sometimes I'd break down crying in the middle of some simple task because Robert had always handled it, and I didn't know what to do. But I was learning. I was figuring things out. And there was something empowering about that. About discovering I was more capable than I'd ever given myself credit for. The estate settlement moved forward. Harold Bennett walked me through all the paperwork. Robert had been more careful with some financial matters than I'd realized. Despite the $600,000 he'd paid to Jessica over 10 years, there was still a decent pension, the house was paid off, and he had life insurance I hadn't known about. "It won't make you rich," Harold explained, "but you'll be comfortable. You won't have to worry about money, at least not in the immediate future." That was more than I'd dared hope for. I'd been terrified I'd have to sell the house, move into some tiny apartment, scrape by on Social Security alone. Knowing I had security, that I could stay in my home, that I wouldn't be a financial burden on my children, it was an enormous relief. Jessica's trial was scheduled for the fall. I'd have to testify, Harold warned me. I'd have to sit in a courtroom and tell strangers about my husband's affair, about the blackmail, about finding out after his death what had been going on. The thought made me sick, but I was prepared to do it. Jessica had humiliated me publicly. Fair was fair. In the meantime, I had to figure out how to live my life. I started going to a grief support group at the church. It met Wednesday evenings, about a dozen people who'd all lost spouses in the past year. Most of them were older than me, some younger. We'd sit in a circle in the church basement and share our stories, our struggles, our small victories. It helped, talking to people who understood, who didn't judge, who knew what it was like to suddenly be alone after decades of partnership, even imperfect partnership. One woman, a lady named Margaret, who'd lost her husband to cancer 6 months ago, became a particular friend. We'd meet for coffee sometimes, just to talk. She never knew about Robert's affair. I didn't share that with the group. couldn't bear to add that layer to my grief in such a public way. But she was a good listener, a kind soul, and her friendship helped more than I could say. I also started going through Robert's things, a little at a time. His clothes in the closet, his shoes lined up neatly by the door, his toiletries in the bathroom. Each item was a small decision, keep or give away. Some things were easy, his work clothes, his everyday shoes, those I boxed up for donation. Other things were harder. His favorite sweater, the one he'd worn so often it was practically threadbare, his reading glasses, his wedding ring, which the funeral home had returned to me. I kept the wedding ring, and the sweater, and a few other things that reminded me of the good times, the real times, before everything got complicated. Summer came, hot and humid the way Charleston summers always are. The grandkids came to visit, which was both wonderful and exhausting. They asked about Grandpa, of course. We'd told them he'd died of a heart attack, which was true. We didn't tell them about Jessica, about the affair, about any of the mess. They didn't need to know. Maybe someday, when they were older, but not now. Sarah and Thomas still came by regularly, checking on me, making sure I was eating properly, taking care of myself. I appreciated it, even when it sometimes felt smothering. They meant well. They loved me. They were worried. I'm fine, I'd tell them. Really, I am. And some days, that was even true. I started taking walks in the neighborhood in the early evenings when the worst heat of the day had passed. I'd walk for 30 minutes or an hour, just moving, breathing, existing. Sometimes neighbors would wave or stop to chat. Sometimes I'd walk alone with my thoughts. One evening in late June, I walked past the house where Bill Hutchins lived, Robert's old friend. Bill was outside watering his plants. He saw me and waved me over. "Dorothy," he said, "I've been meaning to come by, but I wasn't sure if you wanted company. I'm so sorry about Robert and about everything else." So he knew. Of course he knew. Probably everyone knew by now. "Thank you, Bill," I said. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I didn't know. About the affair, about any of it. Robert never said a word to me. I've been thinking back, trying to remember if there were signs I missed, if I should have known, should have said something to you." "It's not your responsibility," I told him. "Robert was good at hiding it. I lived with him, and I didn't know. Or I did know, somewhere deep down, but I didn't let myself acknowledge it." "He loved you," Bill said suddenly. "I know that doesn't change what he did, but I want you to know that. In all the years I knew Robert, every time he talked about you, it was with love and respect. He thought you were the best thing that ever happened to him." I felt tears starting and blinked them back. "Thank you for telling me that." I walked home slowly, thinking about Bill's words. Robert had loved me. He'd also betrayed me. Both things could be true at the same time. People are complicated. Marriages are complicated. Life is complicated. Back home, I made myself dinner, just a simple salad and some grilled chicken. I ate at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where Robert used to mow the lawn in those careful straight lines. The grass was getting long. I'd have to hire someone to mow it. Add that to the list of things I needed to figure out. After dinner, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and Robert's letter. I'd read it so many times I practically had it memorized, but I read it again anyway, looking for what? Forgiveness? Understanding? Closure? Maybe all of those things. Or maybe none of them. What I found instead was a kind of peace, not happiness. I wasn't sure I'd feel happy again for a long while. But peace, acceptance maybe. The understanding that life rarely gives us the neat endings we want, the closure we crave. Sometimes things are messy and complicated and unresolved. Sometimes people we love disappoint us. Sometimes we disappoint ourselves. Robert had made terrible choices. He'd lied and cheated and stolen from our future. But he'd also been a good father, a decent provider, a man who'd tried. however imperfectly, to make things right in the end. Could I forgive him? I didn't know. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. Maybe someday I'd wake up and realize I had forgiven him, or maybe I'd carry this hurt for the rest of my life. Either way was okay. I got to decide that on my own timeline, not anyone else's. What I did know was that I was going to survive this. I was going to rebuild my life, different from what I'd planned, but a life nonetheless. I was 70 years old, yes, but I wasn't dead. I still had time. Time to figure out who Dorothy Williams was when she wasn't Robert Williams' wife. Time to discover what I wanted, what I needed, what brought me joy. That was scary, but it was also, in a strange way, exciting. Jessica Morgan's trial began in September. I dressed carefully that morning, the same navy pantsuit I'd worn to Harold's office the day she was arrested. Armor of sorts. I needed all the confidence I could muster. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing building with white columns and marble floors. Harold met me outside and walked me through security, past the metal detectors and the board guards, up to the courtroom on the 3rd floor. It was smaller than I'd expected. Maybe 30 people could fit in the gallery, though there were only about a dozen there today. Reporters mostly, from what I could tell. A few people I didn't recognize. Sarah was there, sitting in the front row, having taken the day off work to support me. Thomas couldn't make it. He was traveling for work, but he'd called that morning to wish me luck. Jessica sat at the defense table with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. Jessica looked different from the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She wore minimal makeup and a conservative gray dress. Her lawyer's doing, probably, trying to make her look sympathetic, repentant. But when our eyes met across the courtroom, there was no repentance in her gaze, just anger and fear. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on the 2nd day, walking through everything, finding out about the affair from Jessica's outburst at the funeral, reading Robert's letter, discovering the evidence of blackmail. The defense attorney tried to make it seem like Robert had continued the affair willingly, that the payments were gifts rather than extortion, that he'd promised to leave me. But Harold had prepared me well. I stayed calm, stuck to the facts, let the evidence speak for itself. The text messages Jessica had sent threatening to expose Robert, the emails demanding payment, the recordings Robert had made of their conversations where she explicitly threatened him. The other victims testified too. 3 other men Jessica had blackmailed over the years. They were reluctant, ashamed, clearly mortified to have their private mistakes aired in public. But they were brave enough to come forward, to tell their stories, to help make sure Jessica faced consequences. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, blackmail, extortion, wire fraud. She'd used electronic transfers for some of the payments. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. When sentencing day came, I was there again. The courtroom was more crowded this time, more reporters, more spectators. People who wanted to see the final chapter of the scandal that had gripped Charleston society for months. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, read through the charges and the jury's verdict. Then she looked at Jessica and said, "Miss Morgan, you systematically targeted vulnerable men, exploited their mistakes, and extorted money from them over extended periods. Your actions caused immeasurable harm to them, their families, and their financial security. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, repeated pattern of criminal behavior." She sentenced Jessica to 15 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole in 10 if she demonstrated genuine remorse and rehabilitation. 15 years. Jessica would be 70 when she got out, if she served the full sentence. The same age I was now. I felt nothing. Or maybe not nothing, but not the satisfaction I'd expected. Just a kind of tired relief that it was over, that justice had been served, that I could finally move on. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to get statements from me. I politely declined and let Harold handle them. Sarah and I walked to her car in silence. "How do you feel?" she asked me once we were inside, doors closed, away from the cameras and questions. "Tired," I said honestly, "but glad it's done." "Do you feel like you got justice? For what she did to Dad, to you, to your marriage?" I thought about that. "I got legal justice," I said slowly. "She was punished for her crimes, but did it fix anything? Did it undo the damage? No, nothing can do that. Justice doesn't heal wounds, Sarah. It just acknowledges them, I guess. Says that what happened was wrong, and there are consequences for wrong actions." We drove home in comfortable silence. Sarah came in and made us lunch. And we sat at the kitchen table, that same table where I'd cried and read Robert's letter and made so many decisions over the past months, and we talked about other things, her job, her kids, her plans for the upcoming school year, normal things, life things. That's what I needed most, I realized. Normal, life. Moving forward instead of constantly looking back at what had happened, what I'd lost, what might have been. After Sarah left, I sat alone in the quiet house. It was late September now, almost 6 months since Robert died. The grief wasn't as sharp anymore. It came in waves still, but the waves were farther apart, less overwhelming. I could think about him without immediately crying. I could remember good times without the memories being tainted by knowledge of his betrayal. I thought about Jessica in her prison cell, beginning 15 years of confinement. Did I feel sorry for her? No. She'd made her choices, hurt people deliberately for her own gain. She deserved what she got. Did I feel victorious? Not really. There was no victory here, just consequences for bad actions. What I felt, mostly, was free. Free from the fear that more secrets would come out. Free from the anger that had consumed me for months. Free to finally, truly, begin to move on. I walked through the house, room by room. The bedroom where Robert and I had slept for 48 years. The bathroom with his medicine cabinet still half full of his things. The study where I'd discovered the credit card bills and banking statements. The living room where we'd watched TV together thousands of evenings. The kitchen where I'd cooked tens of thousands of meals. This house held so many memories. Some good, some painful, most somewhere in between. But it was my house now, my space, my fresh start. I could sell it, move somewhere new, leave all the memories behind. Or I could stay, reclaim it, make it mine in a way it had never been when I was just Robert's wife living in Robert's house. I chose to stay. This was my home. I'd earned it. And I wasn't going to let Robert's mistakes drive me out of the life I'd built. Fall turned to winter, and Charleston experienced one of its rare cold snaps. Nothing like winters up north, of course, but cold enough that I had to run the heat and bundle up when I went outside. The holidays approached, and I dreaded them. This would be the first Christmas without Robert, the first Thanksgiving, the first of all the family gatherings where his absence would be glaringly obvious. Sarah and Thomas wanted me to spend Thanksgiving with them, passing me between their houses like some kind of holiday custody arrangement. I appreciated the thought, but I told them no. "I'm going to host Thanksgiving here," I announced, like we always did. They were skeptical. "Were you sure, Mom? Wasn't that too much work? Wouldn't it be too sad?" "Maybe," I admitted. "But I need to do it. I need to prove to myself that I can, that holidays don't have to end just because Robert is gone." So I planned Thanksgiving dinner: turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie. All the traditional dishes Robert and I had made together for decades. I sent out the invitations to Sarah and Thomas and their families, just like always. The week before Thanksgiving, I was at the grocery store buying supplies when I ran into Margaret from my grief support group. We chatted about our holiday plans. She was going to her daughter's house in North Carolina, dreading the drive but looking forward to seeing her grandchildren. "You know," she said, "you should come to our Christmas potluck. The grief support group, I mean. We're doing something the week before Christmas for those of us who need extra support during the holidays. Nothing fancy, just food and company and understanding. I'll think about it, I said, though I wasn't sure I'd go. The group had been helpful, but I wasn't sure I wanted to spend Christmas week focusing on grief. Thanksgiving Day arrived, cold but clear. I woke up early and started cooking. The house filled with the smells of roasting turkey and baking pie, familiar smells that brought back 48 years of similar Thanksgivings. Sarah's family arrived first, then Thomas's. The kids ran around the house, excited and loud. The adults gathered in the kitchen, offering to help, getting in my way in that loving, chaotic way families do. We sat down to eat around 2 o'clock. There was an empty chair at the head of the table where Robert usually sat. Nobody mentioned it, but everyone noticed. Before we ate, Thomas said, "Should we say grace?" We always said grace on Thanksgiving, a simple prayer Robert usually led. We all looked at that empty chair, uncertain. "I'll do it," I said. I bowed my head and said a simple prayer, thanking God for family, for health, for food, for second chances. I didn't mention Robert. I didn't feel like I could thank God for him, not yet, maybe not ever. But I could thank God for the strength to keep going, for the love of my children and grandchildren, for the chance to rebuild. The meal was good. The conversation was sometimes stilted, but mostly natural. We talked about school and work and plans for Christmas. We avoided talking about Robert, avoided talking about the trial and Jessica and all the pain of the past year. Just for this one meal, we pretended to be a normal family having a normal Thanksgiving. And it worked, mostly. There were moments when I felt the grief rise up, moments when I caught myself looking at that empty chair. But there were also moments of genuine laughter, moments of joy, moments when I forgot to be sad. After dinner, after everyone left, after I'd done the dishes and put away the leftovers, I sat alone in the living room with a cup of tea. The house was quiet again, but it felt different from the crushing silence of the past months. It felt peaceful. I'd done it. I'd hosted Thanksgiving. I'd kept a tradition alive. I'd proven to myself and to my family that life could go on, that holidays didn't have to end, that joy was still possible even after loss and betrayal and heartbreak. That felt like a victory, small but significant. December came, and with it all the Christmas preparations. I decorated the house, though not as extensively as when Robert was alive. I put up a tree, hung lights, set out the nativity scene that had been Robert's mother's. I sent Christmas cards, baked cookies, wrapped presents for the grandchildren, and I decided to go to the grief support group's Christmas potluck. It was held at Margaret's house, a small ranch not too different from mine. About 8 of us gathered, all people who'd lost spouses in the past year or two. We brought food to share and ate too much, and talked about the challenges of holidays after loss. "The first Christmas is the hardest," one woman said, "or so everyone keeps telling me. I'm not sure I believe them. I think they're all hard, just in different ways." "The worst part is the memories," a man named George said. "Everywhere I look, I remember doing this with Helen, or that with Helen. It's like she's haunting me, except it's not her ghost. It's my own memories." I understood that. Everywhere in my house, there were memories of Robert. Christmases past, traditions we'd kept for decades, moments of joy mixed with the knowledge of betrayal. "I've been trying to make new memories," I said. "Keep some old traditions, but change them slightly. Make them mine instead of ours. It helps, a little." We talked late into the evening, sharing stories and tears and occasional laughter. When I left, I felt less alone than I had in months. These people understood in a way others couldn't. They weren't judging me for still grieving, or telling me I should be over it by now, or uncomfortable with my sadness. They just got it. Christmas itself was quiet. I spent Christmas Eve with Sarah's family, Christmas Day with Thomas's. I went to the candlelight service at church on Christmas Eve, sitting in the pew Robert and I had sat in for decades. I cried during silent night, but quiet tears that felt like release rather than despair. New Year's Eve, I stayed home alone. I wasn't interested in parties or celebrations. But as midnight approached, I poured myself a small glass of wine and stood in the backyard, looking up at the stars. At midnight, as fireworks exploded in the distance and I could hear neighbors celebrating, I raised my glass. To new beginnings, I said out loud, to the empty yard, to the stars, to myself. To survival, to strength I didn't know I had, to whatever comes next. I drank the wine, went inside, and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, it was 2025, a new year, a fresh start. I was 70 years old, a widow, a woman who'd been betrayed and hurt and knocked down. But I was also a survivor. A woman who'd stood up to her husband's mistress, who'd fought for justice, who'd rebuilt her life piece by piece. A woman who was still figuring out who she was, but who was determined to find out. That felt like enough. For now, it felt like enough. Spring came again to Charleston, warm and green and full of life. It had been a year since Robert died, since my life imploded and then slowly, painfully rebuilt itself into something new. I'd made changes in that year. Small ones mostly, but significant to me. I'd started volunteering at the library where I used to work, helping with their literacy program. I'd joined a book club with Margaret and some other women from the grief support group. I'd even started taking a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for when Robert was alive. My relationship with my children had deepened. Sarah and I talked on the phone almost every day. Thomas came by most Sundays for dinner. We'd all learned to talk about Robert in a more balanced way, acknowledging both the good and the bad, the love and the betrayal, the complicated reality of who he'd been. One afternoon in early April, almost exactly a year after Robert's death, I was in the backyard planting tomatoes when Harold Bennett called. "Dorothy," he said, "I have some news about Jessica Morgan's case. Her appeal was denied. The conviction and sentence stand." "That's good," I said, though I found I didn't feel much of anything about it. Jessica Morgan had become irrelevant to my life. She was in prison, paying for her crimes, and I rarely thought about her anymore. "There's something else," Harold continued. As part of restitution, Jessica was ordered to repay the money she extorted from Robert. Obviously, she doesn't have it, but the court has put liens on any assets she might have or acquire in the future. It's unlikely you'll ever see much of that money. But I wanted you to know the court acknowledged the financial harm she caused. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. After we hung up, I went back to my gardening. The tomato plants were small now, but by summer they'd be heavy with fruit. I'd have more tomatoes than I could possibly eat, which meant I'd share them with neighbors and make sauce to freeze and can. Life continuing, seasons turning, things growing despite everything. That evening, I sat down with a cup of tea and wrote a letter. Not to Robert. I'd written him plenty of letters over the past year, angry letters and sad letters and confused letters, none of which I'd ever sent, because you can't mail letters to the dead. This letter was different. "Dear self," I wrote, "a year ago today, your husband died and your world fell apart. In the days and weeks that followed, you discovered betrayals that shook the foundation of everything you thought you knew about your life, your marriage, your 48 years with a man who turned out to be more complicated and flawed than you ever imagined. You wanted to give up sometimes. You wanted to crawl into bed and never come out. You wanted to rage and scream and break things. You did some of those things in private, when no one was watching. But you also got up every morning. You put one foot in front of the other. You faced down your husband's mistress in a funeral home and a lawyer's office and a courthouse. You testified about your pain in front of strangers. You rebuilt your life piece by piece when it would have been easier to just let it stay broken. You learned that people are complicated, that marriages are complicated, that love and betrayal can exist in the same relationship, that someone can hurt you terribly and still have loved you. That forgiveness is a process, not a destination, and it's okay if you never fully get there. You learned that you're stronger than you thought, more capable, more resilient, that at 70 years old you can still grow and change and discover new parts of yourself. You learned that endings can be beginnings, that loss can lead to discovery, that the worst moment of your life doesn't have to define the rest of your life. You're not the same woman you were a year ago. You're someone harder, maybe, but also softer in some ways, more compassionate toward others who are struggling, more understanding of human weakness, more forgiving of imperfection, including your own. You're going to be okay, more than okay. You're going to build a life that's full and rich and meaningful, even if it's different from the life you planned. You're going to find joy again. You're going to make new memories that aren't tainted by betrayal. You're going to discover that there's life after loss, hope after heartbreak, strength after shattering. Keep going, keep growing, keep becoming whoever you're meant to be next. With love and respect, Dorothy, I folded the letter and put it in my journal, a record of this moment, this milestone, this marker of how far I'd come. Then I called Sarah. "Hey, sweetie," I said when she answered. "I was thinking, maybe this summer we could take a trip together. You and me, maybe just a long weekend somewhere. The beach, or the mountains, or wherever. What do you think?" "Really?" Sarah sounded surprised but pleased. "That would be great, Mom. I'd love that." "Good," I said. "Let's start planning. I think it's time I see some new places, make some new memories." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Excitement about the future. Not anxiety, not dread, not fear of what might go wrong. Just genuine excitement about possibilities, about new experiences, about whatever came next. I was 70 years old. My husband had cheated on me and lied to me and died before we could work through any of it. His mistress had blackmailed him for years and then humiliated me at his funeral. I'd spent a year grieving and angry and confused and hurt. But I'd survived, more than survived. I'd grown, I'd learned, I'd changed, and I was ready for whatever came next. If you're still with me after this long journey, I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing my pain and my growth, for walking with me through the worst year of my life and out the other side. If this story resonated with you, if it moved you or made you think, I'd be honored if you'd take a moment to click that like button. And please, in the comments, let me know what you thought. Have you or someone you know gone through something similar? What would you have done in my situation? And tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing this community stretches across cities, states, even countries. If you're not already subscribed, please consider joining our community by hitting that subscribe button. Every story I share here is meant to inspire, to show that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to rebuild, to start over. Your subscription helps these stories reach more women who need to hear them. I learned so many things in the year after Robert died, but the most important lessons were these. It's never too late to discover your own strength. I'd spent 48 years defining myself as Robert's wife, as someone's mother, as part of a partnership. When that partnership was revealed to be built partly on lies, when Robert was suddenly gone, I had to figure out who Dorothy Williams was, all by herself. That was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I discovered I was capable of so much more than I'd thought. I could handle finances and home repairs and legal matters and emotional crises. I could make decisions and stand up for myself and build a life on my own terms. Betrayal doesn't erase the good times. Robert's affair, his lies, his choices, those were real and they hurt. But so were the 48 years we spent together. So were the 2 children we raised and the 4 grandchildren we loved. So were the thousands of ordinary moments of kindness and partnership and love. Both things can be true. People are complicated. They can love you and hurt you. They can be faithful in some ways and unfaithful in others. Accepting that complexity, rather than trying to make Robert into either a saint or a villain, was crucial to my healing. Justice matters, but it's not the same as healing. Watching Jessica Morgan get arrested, testifying at her trial, seeing her sentenced to 15 years in prison, all of that mattered. It acknowledged that what she'd done was wrong. It meant she'd face consequences for her actions. But it didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the hurt or bring Robert back or make our marriage retroactively honest. Justice was important, but it was just one small piece of moving forward. Community is everything. My children, my friends from grief support group, my church family, my neighbors, all of them helped carry me through the worst times. I couldn't have survived alone. Nobody can. We need each other, need to share our burdens, need to know we're not the only ones struggling. If you're going through something difficult right now, please reach out. Find a support group, talk to friends, see a therapist. Don't try to carry it all alone. It's never too late to start over. I was 70 years old when my life fell apart. That's an age when most people think their stories are mostly written, when change feels impossible, when starting over seems ridiculous. But I'm here to tell you it's not. At 70, I began discovering parts of myself I never knew existed. I started new hobbies, made new friends, built a new identity separate from being somebody's wife. Age is not an excuse for giving up or accepting less than you deserve. It's never too late to grow, to change, to become whoever you're meant to be. If Robert could see me now, and sometimes I like to imagine he can, I think he'd be proud. Proud that I survived his death and the revelations that followed. Proud that I stood up to Jessica and made sure she faced consequences. Proud that I didn't let his mistakes destroy me. But more importantly, I'm proud of myself. Proud of my strength, my resilience, my capacity to rebuild. Proud that I turned one of the worst things that ever happened to me into an opportunity for growth. Proud that I kept going even when it would have been easier to give up. To anyone listening who's going through their own crisis, their own betrayal, their own dark night of the soul, you can survive this. I know it doesn't feel like it right now. I know the pain feels overwhelming. I know you can't see a way forward, but I promise you there is a way forward. It might not be the path you imagined or wanted, but it exists. Take it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time if necessary. Get up in the morning. Put one foot in front of the other. Do the next thing, even when you don't know what comes after that. Reach out for help. Let people who love you carry some of the weight. Be gentle with yourself. Grief and healing aren't linear. Some days will be better than others, and that's okay. And know that it's never too late. Never too late to stand up for yourself. Never too late to demand better. Never too late to rebuild. Never too late to discover your own strength. Never too late to start over. I'm 71 years old now. I'm a widow, yes. A woman who was betrayed, yes. But I'm also so much more than that. I'm a volunteer, a book club member, a beginning watercolor painter. I'm a grandmother who spoils her grandchildren. I'm a friend to women who understand grief and loss. I'm a survivor who turned pain into growth. I'm still figuring out who Dorothy Williams is, now that she's not half of a couple. But I'm excited to find out. And that excitement, that hope, that possibility, that's the real victory. Not the legal justice, not the vindication, not proving anyone wrong. The real victory is waking up in the morning and being genuinely curious about what the day might bring. It's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to discover your strength. It's never too late to start writing a new chapter, even when you thought your story was finished. My name is Dorothy Williams. I'm 71 years old, and I'm just getting started.